It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, gentlemen. Al, yesterday the House passed the Trump-favored budget bill. I mean, it's an extraordinary bill in itself. Just to list a couple of things, with Medicaid, it looks like with new requirements, they're going to take about 9 million off that kind of coverage. With Medicare, this will probably trigger somewhere in the area of $500 billion in cuts over the next 10 years. With SNAP or food stamps, we're looking at probably dropping 3 million from that program. They've taken away tax credits for clean energy, and they've cut the IRS by 20 billion. But in the same time, they've added approximately about $4 billion in debt to this country over the next decade. I mean, I don't know how the Senate's going to handle this, but this is remarkable. And, I must say it might be a significant victory for Trump. But let's get your thoughts.
Well, you did a very good job of describing the bill. Look, I find this really ironic. Trump talks about being a populist, about worrying about working and middle class, lower income people. He did very well in the election with them. There was just an analysis out this week that showed how much he turned those voters who just occasionally vote and tend to be more working class. But the great irony is this is really a Republican bill. This is a bill I'd expect from Craig Fuller and Ronald Reagan. I mean, it's the regular Republican formula. It's you give big tax cuts to your rich friends, and you pay for it or pretend to pay for it by cutting spending programs for poor people, middle class people. I mean, that always was the good old time Republican religion. But at least in Fuller's days, they gave lip service to the deficit. They increased it, but and I think if you went through and looked at really for the last 50 years, if you looked at Republican administrations and Democratic administrations, you'd think the Democrats were the party of fiscal responsibility, but the Republicans are the party that can talk it best. But as you said, this, according to the Joint Committee on Taxation, which is basically a bipartisan committee, it's going to add $3.8 trillion to the national debt over the next decade. Republicans used to be concerned about that. I mean, I thought that was why they formed the Tea Party in 2010. But all those Tea Party people are now the Freedom Caucus, led by your own Andy Harris, seem to just turn the other cheek and say, okay, Reagan or Trump wants this, so we'll give it to him, whether it makes sense or not. Now, I personally think this bill will be modified considerably in the Senate, but you never know because Trump does seem to have sort of a mesmerizing effect on Republican senators. But I think it's worth examining what the consequences of this bill are likely to be if it were passed as is. First of all, it would raise, the deficit would be higher than the GNP. Or GDP, the gross domestic product, which means we're going to be more dependent on foreigners and foreign governments to finance the debt than ever before, and we are pretty dependent on them now. It would raise the debt to GDP ratio, I think, to 129%. And that's higher than ever in history, even at the end of World War II, when we weren't producing much domestically because we were fighting a war. Now, I'm not an expert on a bond market because I'm a Democrat, and Democrats don't know very much about bond markets. But it's likely to destabilize the bond market, and that means interest rates will go up. We saw the first indications that yesterday. I think yields went up pretty considerably yesterday. And we're also starting to see some concern again in the stock market, this time about deficits. Last time it was about tariffs. So domestically, again, I don't understand all the machinations, but what I understand is when the long-term yields go up, so do mortgage rates. And that is not a consequence that I'm sure the Republicans want. Now, if you think about it, Trump, with his crazy foreign policy of loving our enemies and hating our friends, and his tariffs have already really shaken up, if not destabilized, the world order and the economic order that gave us peace and prosperity and made us the strongest and most prosperous country in the world since World War II. And it seems to me that this bill, following on on the heels of the tariffs, are going to further erode foreign confidence in America is the place to invest. That would be a sure thing. And that's going to be a problem if we're more dependent on foreigners than ever before to pay for the debt. Now, what does it do politically? You listed all the cuts. I'm just going to focus on Medicaid. Trump actually promised he wasn't going to touch Medicaid, and even this week he's been saying, "Don't touch Medicaid," while they've been cutting, the bejesus out of it in the bill. He can't quite understand that, I guess. But as our mutual friend Bill Kristol, who was a Republican, for those who need to know this. He was the chief of staff for Vice President, Vice President under George Bush. For President Quayle. As Crystal pointed out today, the last 3 times we've had landslide elections in the midterms that have gone against the party in power were 1994 when the Republicans took Congress when Clinton was president, 2010 when the Republicans took Congress when Obama was president, and 2018 when the Democrats took Congress, the House, when Trump was president. It was all over health care. First it was a reaction. Americans like to complain about their health care, but they really are pretty happy with it, and they don't like it when parties try to change it. And, we had the Clinton effort in 1994 for health care, and the Republicans mounted a successful campaign against that. You had Obamacare, and in 2010, the Republicans ran against Obamacare, and it was before it was in effect, and they did very well. And then in 2018, after Obamacare was operating and people liked it, the Republicans decided they wanted to repeal it, and that didn't serve them very well either. The best estimates are that these cuts are going to drive 8 million people out of health insurance. In other words, 8 million people will lose their health insurance. But there's something else to remember about Medicaid. You like to think about it as a program for the poor, but it's really a very important program for the middle class as well, because it's the way a lot of families finance nursing home care. I'll just give you an example. When my mother was in her last year of life, we spent, I think, $250,000 of our own money in addition to Medicare. And you got to a point where if she had lived longer, she would have had to go to a nursing home, and there was no way we could have financed it. So I was looking to Medicaid, and a lot of families have to do that. So, look, as we've talked about all year, the only way Democrats are going to stop Trump and Trumpism is at the polls. And if they play it right, this big, beautiful bill will give them an effective weapon to utilize in 2026.
Craig, just as a side note, it should be said that our congressman actually voted present on the budget bill, and as one critic said, he took a strong and principled stand to do nothing and refused to waver from his firm commitment to do nothing. But in the broader picture, this is going to be a major challenge for the Senate, and I guess the issue is, where does it all come out for you?
Well, so guys, I have an advantage. I will admit that I thought perhaps the most courageous thing to do in this important week was to travel to Italy. So I've got a 6-hour head start on you. I was able to monitor the legislative and parliamentary actions that kicked off about 1 a.m. when the Rules Committee began their work to insert things into this bill before the bill actually was even final, to insert things in to try to win those all important votes. And yes, you're right. Andy Harris courageously voted present. The bill passed by 215 to 214 votes, and with great celebration on the Republican side at the end. I did have this head start, and you've both done an excellent job of laying out the particulars of the bill. My in-depth analysis is this bill, this measure, is number one, bad policy, and number two, bad politics, and for all the reasons you stated and more. In fact, the one thing you missed, which to me speaks of how just crazy this is that you mentioned, and they did in fact, they are seeking to reduce tax credits on clean energy, but they are giving a tax credit to people who purchase silencers. Buying a silencer for your weapon is not like a defensive, activity. And since the 1930s, there's been a tax on the purchase of silencers. But for some reason, to get someone's vote, they decided to provide a tax incentive on silencers. I don't know whether that caused Andy Harris to vote present. I mean, he is a medical doctor, but it certainly should give people pause. But here's the thing: this fits that description of not being the beginning of the end. It's really the end of the beginning. This measure is not going to pass the Senate. Senate Republicans have already said they can't vote for it. And when I say it's bad politics, I mean, when you look at the kinds of challenges that my friend Al suggests that Democrats are going to come after Republicans for, you just know that this is not something that's very defensible. I'm really wondering what they're going to hear when they go home from, as they now are doing, for the Memorial Day weekend. I just can't believe people are going to be very pleased with it. So it's bad politics. The Senate won't support it, so they'll craft their own bill. When they do that, the leader in the Senate, John Thune, has got to figure out a way to gather enough votes. He only needs a majority, but enough votes to pass that. Presumably, with the president's help, they will pass a measure, but it'll be different than the House bill, meaning it has to go to a conference committee, which has to work out the details. And there, the training is more difficult because you can't add in anything that's not already in one of the two bills. Assuming they get through a conference committee, the new bill goes back to both the House and Senate to pass. So we've got a long ways to go. I actually think they're probably in trouble with this. Al rightfully points out the bond market. There's no one that doesn't work for Donald Trump that I can find who knows anything about the economy who actually thinks this is a good idea. And you compound this with what the tariff policy is, and you're beginning to do real damage to the economic outlook going forward. So I think this is kind of sheer folly. But, there's a reason they say there's two things you never want to watch being made are sausage and legislation in Washington. And last night was a great example.
Al, I'd like to talk about this new book about Biden. And by that, I mean that this has been a huge drive by the media to bring up Jack Taper's book. And it just seems to me that at a time when the country is dealing with these critical issues, the media and I would say some Democrats are continuing to battle around the issue of whether Joe Biden was fit for the office or not. What's your take?
Well, first of all, I think that the book which I am just starting to read, is a very good and I think very important book. Jake Tapper and his friend Thompson from Axios, who wrote it with him, are excellent reporters. And I guess I differ with you. I think it's important. Uh, you know, as a Democrat, and in the world that I live in, I mean, Maryland's one of the most democratic states. You know, my social circle are highly educated, uh, Democratic voters. You know, you'd be hard pressed to find a Trump person among the people that are in most of the world I live in. Uh, you know, we tend to, you know, we feel sorry for Biden, and Lord knows it is very sad for him to have this diagnosis of prostate cancer, and I hope he will I hope he will recover and treat it and continue to live a much longer life. But when you look at it realistically, uh, what happened in the last 2 or 3 years in the Biden administration and his deterioration. And I say that with some sadness because I'm his age. And maybe, a lot of people probably think I'm suffering from the same problem. But when you think about his deterioration mentally and physically, and I know he is, I've known him for 50 years. He was a shadow of his former self. And and really the cover up around it, the Politburo. I mean, I know those guys. uh, One of them was a big donor to me, and another was worked for me for years. I mean, they did this country a real disservice, and they did the party a real disservice. Uh, you know, we all like to talk about Trump's lies, and almost every word out of his mouth is one. We like to talk about him diminishing the presidency, and I think he does. He did it again yesterday with his meeting and with the South African president. He embarrasses the country. Uh, but if you're just an ordinary person who is occasionally involved in politics, and you see the president on television and you make a judgment, you know, 2 or 3 years before the election that he's too old to be president, which, 70-80% of the country did, and even a majority of Democrats did. And then you have the president's staff and his wife and his family basically telling you, no, that's not right. He's sharp as a tack. That's a big lie.
Okay.
We talk about a big lie from Trump, and Lord knows it is about, that he won the 2020 election. But if you're dispassionate about it and try not to be partisan about it, this is a lie of equal proportion, because they're trying to foist on you for 4 more years somebody who they know can't be president for 4 years. And so I think it's important. I think we need to, I think people have to come to grips with this in the party, and, and once we do, then we should move on. And the next election won't be about 2028 or about 2024, unless we try to keep this under the rug and don't lance this boil. It's important to do so you can move forward, and then we need to have generational change. It'd be nice to win the House in 2026, and I think we will. Maybe this big beautiful bill will help us win the Senate as well. But then we need to offer the American people a new vision, and if they're gonna trust us, we need to come to grips with the lie that was perpetuated out of the Biden White House.
So, Craig, is this a distraction, or is this a meaningful conversation for the country to have at this point?
Well, I certainly hope it's a meaningful conversation for the reasons Al discussed. I was there and I took an oath, just like the people around Joe Biden took an oath. And the oath is to the Constitution of the United States, it's not to an individual. And while White House staff is always seeking ways to put the best face, the best spin on stories, that's one thing. You're there to support the president elected by the people, but you're not there to camouflage the reality. And I don't know. I know these guys also. I just don't know how they went off the track. Whether they thought that somehow the country would be better off if they could just defeat Trump, and that Biden could do that, and we'll deal with what comes next later. But it was a real mistake. You know, there were people back when President Reagan was shot, that only a few people rushed to the hospital. Only a few. Most of us stayed at the White House, you know, for hours dealing with the issues, getting reports from the top staff that were at the White House with the president, who were talking to the doctors. I don't know of anybody who spoke something that was false, but it did come to be known that not the entire story was told about those moments in the hospital, when things were much closer, much more serious than even those of us thought who were in the White House. And I think, I hope, if anything's accomplished by Jake Tapper's book and probably others, that it absolutely reminds people who take these jobs, you are there to serve the country, you're there to support the Constitution, and you know, this sort of behavior is simply wrong. I got asked after I'd been out for quite a while. I probably was talking to a group of students or something, and somebody said, "Well, weren't you asked quite a few times to lie in the job that you had at the White House?" And I said, "You know, nobody asked me to lie even once. Did they ask me to, you know, talk to reporters? Did they ask me to put a good spin on things? Yes, of course. But nobody asked me to lie, and had they asked me, I wouldn't have done it. That's not in my makeup. And the trouble is, once you do it, for those who engage in that, where do they stop?" And so it's a very slippery slope. It's a very dangerous thing to do. I think the press is feeling guilty. I kind of asked myself, why did this book even get written? But I think part of it is to tell the story that wasn't told when they should have been reporting it, and they just didn't know it. But I do hope it causes people to really carefully consider what they're doing. And I might add, that goes for the current administration, because some of the decisions that are made by the Attorney General and by the Secretary of Defense and, you know, others there, you really have to wonder, are they exercising their own good judgment, or are they just simply doing what they're told to do? So it was not a great moment for Joe Biden or the people around him. And now we know a lot more about it than we used to.
Well, we have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thanks so much. We'll see you next week.